Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective here on Heavenward Thinking. Today we're finishing off Luke chapter 2, starting in verses 41 through 52. So I'll read it and we'll get right into today's conversation. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival, according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man. So as we look at this with a fresh perspective, what stands out to you immediately?
Well, what stands out to me is how complicated this is. Right? This is a story we don't talk about a lot, and it is unbelievably relevant. Right? It is better for us to obey God than man. Is the principle that's in here. Right? You look at this story, and if you want to look from a fresh perspective, how about you look at it from the fact that Jesus sinned? Right? Jesus, his parents say, "Why did you do this to us?" That makes it sound like he did something wrong, right? The reality of this is he could have been disciplined right here for disobeying, right? For not being obedient to his parents, yet still not have sinned. And that blows our mind, right? Again, God trumps humans every time. So if Jesus is doing that which God has told him to do, then he's not sinning. Because sin is a you and God thing. It's not a you and people thing. You don't sin regardless of what people like to think about. The only reason lying is sin is because God says it's sin, not because you and I say it's sin, right? Again, it's super important. It's one of those concepts that matters with like certain bad words that we say. When we get to heaven, is God going to give us a whole list of bad words that we said and said, you said all these bad words? Or are those man's bad words, right, that we're making God hold people accountable to? And we might get up there and God may say, yeah, that's not a bad word, right? So those things are, this section is so relevant. It's not funny for our time period that we're living in right now, but there are things I'm convinced that God is going to say we're not sin, that we think are sin. And there's things that God is going to say we're sin, that we're going to say, well, no, we know why they did it. Right? On the outside of this story, thanks for letting me preach. On the outside of this story, it looks like Jesus sinned. He disrespected, dishonored his parents. But he doesn't even acknowledge that. He simply says, I need to do what God told me to do.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's very relevant because we don't like to look at the story because we don't really know what to do with it most of the time. Because it does, like you said, from the very beginning of the story and from just the mere glance at it, it looks like he was doing something wrong. But when you look into it and you investigate it and examine what is said here in Scripture, it's very clear that he did not sin. He did not do anything wrong. He was honoring his Heavenly Father first and foremost, which is what we're told to do and what Jesus emphasized throughout his ministry. We're supposed to honor God first, do what God has called us to do first, seek first his kingdom, and then everything else will take care of itself. If we are honoring the Lord first, then all of our other human relationships will be adequate. They will be fulfilled. He wasn't doing something wrong against his parents. He was just choosing first to listen to God, first to do what God had called him to do, and then he would be submissive to his parents.
Yeah, this story blows our mind because there are lots of things in life that look to us as if they're bad, right? But God says, I put this together, right? You look at, for instance, the woman who touched Jesus, who had been bleeding for all those years, right? And she was in, the story tells us that she was in a tightly packed crowd. She was bleeding. She's unclean. And everybody she touched is unclean. They're ceremoniously unclean, including Jesus. Did Jesus sin did all those people sin by not moving away from her and by not doing all those things? No. It's an act of God, right? God did it, and God sometimes does these really weird things. Sometimes he puts people together and we're like, oh, no, you can't, that's wrong, it's wrong. And yet if you really pray about it, if you really think about it, there are people that we're going to accuse of things that we're going to get to heaven and God's going to say, no, it wasn't that way.
Absolutely.
Because God put things together. We got to be really careful.
And as we've talked about many times on this show, God's plans and his ways are so much higher than our own and so much different than our own. So we shouldn't be surprised when God does surprising things, because we know that that's what God does. As we already talked about in Luke chapter 1, God did a lot of things that didn't make sense in that chapter. Having an old woman get pregnant, having Mary, who was a virgin, get pregnant outside of wedlock, having all these different things happen. He did something totally unique, and it shouldn't be any surprise to us that here in the second chapter of Luke, we're continuing to see that same thing as we gear up to what's going to be in the next couple of chapters, where we get to Jesus' ministry. And then we're going to see Jesus do some really crazy things that the religious people of the time would have accused him of all kinds of things. They accused him of blasphemy, of all kinds of sins. And he showed through his ministry that first and foremost we need to do what's honoring and pleasing and obedient to the Lord. And then we can take care of everything else after that. But we have it flipped so much in our society where it's please people first, do whatever people say, make people happy, and then if you have time for God, that's great. But that's backwards.
So I think it's important, right, that we, John and Peter, when they were in front of the Sanhedrin, right, in Acts chapter 4, they asked the question, is it better for us to obey God or men? Right? That's a constant question. I wrote this this week on my Simple Truth, right, that we better be careful what we're attributing to God, right, in a prayerful manner, right? So if we're going to attribute things to God, we better pray about that before and make sure that we have. There are lots of things that I look at that I declare wrong. Disrespecting parents. And God says, if you'd pray about it, if you'd ask me, if you'd seek me, right? Discernment. People who have great discernment and wisdom, it's not that they have it up here and they look at things that it's God gives it to them. They ask for it. So before they open their mouth and declare something wrong, they ask God, is this wrong? Right? And then God says to them, it may look really weird, it may look goofy, but no, I put this together. And what God says in our marriage ceremony, which isn't just for marriage, is what God puts together, let no man asunder. You better not come up against what God is doing. Right? So lately, my question to people is, did you pray about it? So before you come tattle to me and you say, oh, I did you pray about it? Did God tell you that what you saw was wrong? Because that's a you and God thing. And if he did, right, then that's sin. You need to address it. But again, what Mary does here, what I love about this is, once again, Mary ponders. Right? She ponders it and wonders, what in the world is this all about? How much better off would you be in life if we actually started pondering things? Right? Discerning people aren't smart people who know all kinds of Bible knowledge and all kinds of... Discerning people are people who are in tune with God.
And that's what we see here, at least an indication of at the end of the chapter. Like you said, not only does she ponder, but they both seem to have an acknowledgement here of they may not know what Jesus was saying to them. It says in it that they didn't know what he was saying, but they at least got it that he had to be there at that time. That they did. It doesn't show that they went and punished him. It doesn't show that they were angry with him here. They were astonished. It says they were astonished, but it does not say they were angry or that they disciplined him in any way, because regardless of if they understood everything perfectly, which we know they didn't, they were able to see and to stop and think for a minute, maybe, is this a God thing? That definitely, to me, seeing how Mary responds by treasuring these things in her heart, pondering them, it seems to me that they were able to take a step back and really think about maybe God could be doing something different than what they had planned.
Yep.
Well, I hope you've been challenged by this and encouraged by this week, and that you'll join us next time for another episode of A Fresh Perspective as we look at Luke chapter 3 next week.